And thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm delighted to be chairing the discussion, which brings together leaders from academia and industry from across 4 continents today. As higher education continues to change and evolve faster than ever before, it's our aim to discuss digital transformation policies and resources that have proven most effective since March, and also to talk about how universities can continue to transform into the future. So, joining me today on our panel are Leah Belsky, who is the Chief Enterprise Officer at Coursera, which is based in North America. Rawdon Wilkinson, who is Pro Vice Chancellor for Education and Student Experience at UNSW Sydney in Australia. Isaac Frauman, who is Head of the Institute of Education at Hsc University in Russia. And Loretta O'Donnell, who is Vice Provost of Academic Affairs at Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan. Thank you all very much for being here. I'd like to jump straight in by talking about one of the most practical applications for digital transformation when people talk about the new ways in which people are introducing modular learning and different forms of learning at universities, which is the best practice for teaching graduate skills that can increase their employability. Rawdon, given that you've stayed up the latest to join us, I'd like to start with you. I was just wondering how UNSW are undertaking this, and in particular how it maybe dovetails with Australia's new micro-credential scheme, and perhaps even also the differential pricing that's talked about being introduced for different university courses in Australia.
Thanks, Alistair. That's quite a question.
Yes.
So let me see if I can deal with those 3 bits individually. The graduate skills piece is a really important one. As you know, government policy in Australia really is driving forward a graduate skills agenda. And the government have been encouraging us in a number of ways to put forward what are really small, stackable programs that allow us to get greater numbers of students engaged in particular areas. And I think that's fine, and we're all responding well. There are clearly challenges in doing that with any university. But I think we're also trying to make sure that we build skills into everything that we do. So given that this is a panel about digital transformations, one of the things that we've been doing, because COVID-19 has really encouraged us to do this, is ask questions about our digital ecosystem. Because I think we probably are testing the limits of dedicated LMSs that really focus on bespoke learning environments that students never use beyond universities. And one of the things we're trying to do is bring those into ecosystems and make the most of the kinds of platforms that build soft skills by allowing students to utilize tools that they will use when they leave university. Now, you know, we're using Zoom at the moment. Microsoft Teams has been very important for lots of folks. But that soft skills component is really important for us. And then it's about trying to get behaviors modeled in those environments that I think our students really have to respond to. And that's just, you know, making sure that they authentically network and collaborate in digital ways. So that's kind of some of the things that we've been doing. There are a number of other initiatives that we could talk about, but I think I'll end my first comments there.
Okay, thank you very much. Isaac, if I could come to you next to talk a little bit about HSE, because I think HSE is an interesting case in that it was already undergoing quite a large transformation even before March. And for those who don't know, HSE was formerly branded as the Higher School of Economics, but it is now a multidisciplinary institute, and it's a multi-campus institute in Russia as well. And when I've worked with your colleagues previously, and we spoke about what the work that is done at HSE, part of it is a big emphasis on multidisciplinary learning. Does digital transformation give a university like HSE more of an opportunity to push multidisciplinary learning, and does that help with employability, do you think?
Frankly speaking, thanks, Alistair, first. And best wishes from Moscow. Today we have the so-called Knowledge Day. It's a kind of national holiday. It's not a holiday in terms of, it's a working day, but it's a day when all Russian schools and universities officially open new academic year. And definitely this year is very different from everything that I've seen before, because in schools we have only first graders that come today, and poor school principals have a lot of difficulties in managing different streams of students, etc. We also had our opening ceremony today on Zoom, but tomorrow we meet our students face to face. We'll see how it's going to be. We have to follow quite strict sanitary rules. But answering your question, it's extremely interesting. You know, despite HSC became indeed very digital, I would say, during last years, we mostly opened our online space for external users, not for our own students. Our own students were encouraged to get online courses, probably one course within the whole curriculum outside, but it was not made about our internal work. So these 4 months really made a difference. And now we see what we found. We found that despite all limitations and problems and tensions and anxiety, we found that now our students can talk with the whole world and can go to and can attend lessons in other campuses, classes in other campuses in our departments. So since this year, the requirement is that by the end of the year, we plan that quarter of our courses will be opened for all HSC students in 4 cities, St. Petersburg and 2 more cities. So we had to change our schedule. It's a painful decision, but we have to adopt even the time difference, because one of our campuses has 3 hours time difference with Moscow. So we think, to answer your question exactly, I think that indeed we now have wider, broader opportunities for multidisciplinary learning. But we cannot say, does it affect employability? That's a bit too premature. Thanks.
Well, no, yeah, thank you for being honest. Loretta, if I can come to you to ask about Nazarbayev. I mean, it's a young university. It's less than a decade old, but it's had an incredible amount of growth in that time, and you very much position yourself as a vector for modernization. And does this period of digital transformation play into your hands? Does it strengthen what you're trying to do?
Yes, thanks, Alistair, and good evening, everybody. This is a really extraordinary time in the growth of our young university. As Alistair mentioned, we are actually 10 years old this year. We've grown to about 6,000 students, and we only intend to grow to between 8,000 and 10,000 at maximum. So we want to be small, high quality, and very research intensive, relevant for Kazakhstan, Central Asia, and the broader region. But we've experimented on the edges with online learning up till now. But of course, COVID meant we went online and had 3 weeks to prepare. We took and then came back in 3 weeks. And as some of my colleagues were saying, what we've been talking about doing for the last 4 or 5 or 6 years, we had to do in 3 weeks. We've just recently appointed our very first CIO, and he was instrumental in putting together what he called a SWAT team to really maximize all the technology to help us. But for me personally, in my role, I think one of the most exciting and opportunistic components of this has not been so much about online teaching, but online assessment. We had probably fallen into the habit of doing a lot of traditional assessment because we're very much, we have a big STEM focus. And certainly outside our medical school, we've been fairly traditional in things like midterm quizzes and final big examinations. And we had to reimagine assessment. And that's been quite profound for us. Some of our colleagues are still working through what that means. But I think at the end of the day, it's better for students because they're getting to do more, as I think is happening at UNSW and elsewhere, more group work, more online projects, more video narrations, and a whole range of opportunities to think about assessment quite differently. So that's one of the big advantages. Of course, there's lots of challenges, but it's pushed us harder and faster in the direction we were going, but we're going there much faster than we would have done.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rise of program level assessment is something that looks like it will only continue now more, particularly as the type of teaching changes. It perhaps stands to reason that type of assessment will evolve alongside that. I was just wondering about Nazbaev's remit in general. I mean, because you're a young, dynamic university and you have this remit. I mean, you're founded by the state but autonomous.
Yes.
How much does boosting employability for the country and the region fall within your remit?
It's extremely important. And I think you were saying in your earlier remarks, Alistair, that this has really accelerated a lot of other initiatives. And we were already undertaking, as part of our 10-year anniversary, a major university transformation project. And one of those projects is really around employability. We'd already conducted a lot of surveys amongst our local employers. And interestingly, apart from some specific skills, one thing employers wanted of us was a clear sense that our students were good at soft skills, obviously teamwork, but also good at communication. And our employers are telling us what they really want is very, very strong writing skills. And we know that our students are working often in their third language after Russian, Kazakh. So English, they're very good coming in because we test them before they enter. But we've then responded to that by ensuring that in our new core curriculum, they have writing across the curriculum. They all learn rhetoric and composition, and we've expanded our writing centre to support that. So it wasn't an obvious component from the employer survey, but it's something that we've taken seriously and resourced appropriately. So it's not so much, of course, that's all available digitally to our students. But given our remit, it's not only writing that employers say they want, but they want really our students to have the confidence to make change, because it's an economy that's going through major change. And one way we've really worked with that particular piece of feedback is to ensure our students obviously are technically strong. So we have a core curriculum which makes sure they're deep and broad. But we make sure that ethics is a compulsory course for all of our undergraduate students, whether they're studying robotics, nursing, engineering, they all study ethics. And interestingly, that was the one course we were starting to put online anyway, because all our students have to take it. One of our wonderful professors, who's from Belgium, Siegfried van der Voort, spent a lot of time developing this great online course, which we can now roll out in a much more comprehensive way.
Great, thanks. You actually preempted a question I had about that, because I noted that Nazbaev has what it calls a graduate attributes skills list to put at the heart of what it does. And that includes, in addition to ethics, it's also critical thinking, leadership, learning to accept a diversity of views. I just wanted to take that over to Rawdon and Isaac as well, just open it up to all three of you. I mean, does digital transformation, can it help structure the assessment of those things better going forward? You know, is there a way to build that in as a core component, and will it become more widespread, do you think?
Colleagues, if you don't mind, maybe I'll jump in and say a bit here. So I think Loretta really introduces the nub of what the transformation is going to be about, and it really is about assessment. And that's not just about skills, but across the whole piece of what we're doing. And I think there's an art here that none of us have really yet cracked. I think, and while UNSW is moving very fast ahead to try and get this sorted out, The way we assess, I think, in Global HE generally, still tries too much to electrify what it is that we were already doing. And I don't think that's often very helpful. It certainly doesn't enable, I think, students to understand the skills that they acquire alongside the academic learning outcomes. And I think that we probably have to work a bit harder about that. So within the skills that we would assess, you clearly need a very good badging regime. And one of the problems with a very good badging regime is you need to make sure that it's platform agnostic and that it can actually be portable through time. And it's probably one of the few places where paper currently has an advantage, because you end up with a testama or a certificate which may well outline the skills that you have badged. As soon as you put into a digital platform, then it's contingent in some way on that platform. So I think the two things that we have to work out in tandem are how we actually assess those skills and also how we record those skills and how students report them.
Leah, sorry, in that case, now might be a good time to bring you in as somebody who's working on the supplier side of this digital transformation process. And perhaps you could talk about the conversations that Coursera has been having with universities since March. I mean, because Coursera, for those of you who don't know, has had an incredible upswing in its business. I think you've increased by something like sort of 650% HEIs in the past, not even 6 months. So clearly people are engaging with you about this. It'd be interesting to get your views.
Okay. So back in March, UNESCO announced that there were over 1.6 billion students that were now learning at home. And what followed was this process of universities figuring out how to teach online and how to rethink what the university was about, as we've heard from my colleagues here. And so what Coursera did is we stepped back and we figured out how could we mobilize the platform we have, which has over 3,800 courses from top global universities, as well as online labs and projects from top companies to support both this emergency response, but also the ongoing digital transformation of higher ed. And so we released a platform called Coursera for Campus, which enables any university to deploy the Coursera courses either as part of their core curriculum for credit, or more broadly to enable multidisciplinary learning. And the response was absolutely tremendous. So there are over 18,000 universities around the world that reached out and deployed Coursera. And from that engagement, we've seen a number of important trends emerging that we think will be meaningful in the future. The first is that a lot of the universities that engaged us were looking to do two things. One, they were very aware that there were key areas of their curriculum that were just behind the standard. Courses, they didn't have courses in data science or in statistics or in business skills or in technology. And they took the opportunity to actually deploy the Coursera courses to supplement the existing faculty that they had. And in some cases, there weren't available faculty to teach those courses. So they instead would deploy a course like a Python course from Michigan, a world-class course in Python that allowed their learners to join a global community of learners to study Python programming. The second thing we saw is that because students were now learning online, there was an opportunity for students to start learning outside of their major and learning courses that the university wouldn't have traditionally made available. So you saw liberal arts students suddenly taking statistics courses and health students suddenly taking business students. And so what we've seen is it's really opened up conversations with universities on this topic of how they actually enable employability and enable acquisition of career relevant skills. And so now we're bringing the universities together and have an opportunity to actually say, what does your curriculum look like? And to what extent do you want to teach that curriculum with your own faculty? To what extent do you want to supplement your faculty and enable them to bring in courses from other global universities? And to what extent do you actually want to build out your university so that every student, whether they're a psychology major, whether they're a health major, whether they're a business major, will have an opportunity to also acquire career relevant skills as part of their major. The other thing that happened that's really striking and connects to what Rorden was saying is that we recently launched an offering called guided projects. So these are essentially online labs that allow a student to go on and complete a project. So a project might be create your first Python program or create your first HTML website. And what's interesting about the projects, first of all, we had over 1 million students enroll in these projects, but they essentially also became a new form of assessment in many contexts, because students were then able to take the results of their project and share it with their professors or share it as part of their external LinkedIn portfolio. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversations, not just about how you earn a certificate or a degree or a credential from a course, but how you use some type of online artifact that is evidence of skills demonstration to bring forward as part of a learning portfolio and as part of a resume.
Okay.
So that's where we are, and it's exciting to be part of this conversation and to engage with all of you. I think conversations about opening up university ecosystems, both at a technology layer, but also between universities and enabling an interaction, as well as rethinking what are the skills that universities need to teach. The last thing I'll say is that, in addition to seeing the university part of our work explode, we also saw a huge rush of independent consumer learners as well as corporate learners focus on the platform. And in companies in particular, what COVID has brought is an acceleration of digital transformation on the corporate side as well. So we've seen a big rush among companies to focus on skilling up their employees in business and data and technology. And so now all this data that we have from what top companies are enabling their users to learn is data that we can make available to universities as they start to shape their curriculum.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. Isaac, if I could just bring you in, because I think it's interesting to note where Russia fits within the global landscape here, because as I understand it, the skills that HSE was teaching to this point have been those sort of complementary skills that complement research skills, and they will be things that can help students become better researchers, and it is all of the sort of maybe some of the soft skills that we were talking about earlier. At the same time, Russia is undergoing its own transformation, where this is like the Skolkovo Institute is being touted as the next kind of Silicon Valley hub globally, and it has the 5 to 100 academic excellence project. There's clearly a huge amount of ambition already in Russia to transform and take its higher education to the next level. I was just wondering, how do you anticipate digital transformation, more things moving online, more things becoming collaborative? How will that help, and what do you think will be some of the activity we see where you are in the world?
Thank you very much, Alistair. And it's a pleasure for me to speak after Leah, because Hsc University is very active partner of Coursera. And as I remember, if I remember correctly, we are one of the biggest partners in terms of the offering of the courses, etc. But the question that Alistair asked is very interesting and difficult, because we, as higher education institutions, we now are in the critical juncture of different trends. And definitely we all expect economic difficulties. We have a lot of logistical difficulties now, especially in terms of international students. And I'm afraid, and our interviews with university rectors confirm, that many university leaders think about digital transformation as inevitable evil. We have to do that. We would rather stay as we are, but we have to do something with these international students, etc. So I guess that we now are quite far from strategic thinking about the possibilities of digital technologies in terms of binding them with the substantial transformation of universities. Our institute led a big research exercise during these 6 months, starting in mid-March, a bit less than 6 months. And we interviewed hundreds, professors, rectors, thousands of students. And I'm afraid that, again, we consider in terms of strategic positioning of digital technologies, we may be even a bit kind of behind the wave. You know, it's coming, but we think that it could help in this difficult time. But in normal time, we would not need that. So I'm afraid, again, that our professional community is not ready yet to live with this new reality. Maybe it sounds strange, but I'm a bit pessimistic about the perception of the transformative role of digital technologies.
If I could add something there, I think what Isaac says is interesting. And I would say that, you know, where I would disagree is that there's also a lot of universities that are now under great financial pressure, either because they're worried about students coming back to school, or they're worried about when they do come back, they won't be willing to pay that tuition. And what we're seeing is that financial pressure is causing them to rethink their business model in significant ways. And when you look at the business model, it turns out there are cheaper ways to produce a credit of learning in, say, a data science course or a technology course, or in many courses than hiring some of the most esteemed faculty. Now, this probably doesn't apply to Hsc, which is one of the leading global universities that attracts the very, 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 very best minds. But there's many other universities out there that are not in that top leadership position that can attract those faculty at reasonable prices and still need to be able to teach these types of courses. So, you know, what I anticipate is that a lot of the transformation that happens now in higher ed, some will happen through the leadership of innovators and leaders like we have on this call right now. But the rest may happen because universities need to innovate to survive and to be able to continue to have a financially stable business model. And that's an interesting situation.
Yeah, it's something that I think we go back and forth about with the THE editorial, because, you know, we do represent this workforce, and there is a huge sense of excitement around the potential for digital transformation, but there is several notes of warning that we cannot put academic staff under too much pressure and too quickly and ask them to completely change the way that they work in what is already a very highly pressurized environment for all the reasons that are going on outside of our jobs, you know. So it's definitely something that that requires a careful approach. I think that takes us on to the next point for discussion, which was, I wanted to ask the panel what their criteria was or is for a strong digital offering to students.
Sorry, can I have a go at that?
Of course, feel free.
Thanks, Alistair. For us, I think you already mentioned we have 8 graduate attributes, and they in every sense drive everything that we do as a campus. And as you mentioned, it includes ethics, but also good communication, being a leader. All of those things are the foundation stone for every single program. So over the past 10 years, we've been in the great position of being able to create new programs. And so we've got, I think, 30 master's programs. We've got now 12 PhD programs and a range of undergraduate programs. And so student-centered learning, obviously, is at the heart of everything that we do. So our rubric for ourselves, or our rule of thumb, is, does this assist in student learning? And can this, what initiative, whatever it is, can it help us achieve our 8 graduate attributes? If it does, it's a yes. If it doesn't, then we don't do it. And I think what we've learned in 10 years, that there's a lot of distractions in the world of higher education. And what we need, at least in our context, is a clear strategy. And for us, a strategy is the art of choosing what not to do, because there's many options, but what do we say no to so that we can just focus on our clear line of sight?
Alistair, maybe I can just add a bit to what Loretta said, because I think this is a fascinating area. So you asked what makes for a strong digital offering. And I think if we were to focus on those things that we would see the strongest uptake in, clearly it has to be a subject area that's of the moment, one that encourages strong demand. Data science is something that Leah talked about, and that's clearly something that is very much in the minds of students and potential students at the moment. But, a strong digital offering, I think now that we have all come a very long way on our digital journeys, has to have synchronous and asynchronous elements. It just has to have a capacity for students to consume their education at times of their choosing, in ways that they want to choose it, but that also has interactive elements that engage with educators, peers, and is involved in some co-creation of knowledge in some way, whether that's collaborating around projects, but all of that needs to be facilitated in a decent platform. And the real art of a digital offering, I think, then is about making sure that it really is that hyper individualized nirvana we've all been looking for in education. And for me, that necessitates that it's not just about parading all the great platforms that we've got, it's about getting the stitching right between those platforms so that students can move from collaboration to assessment to consumption, and then back again with ease in their own time of choosing. So I would say that's what makes for a strong digital offering as well.
Isaac, what would your criteria be, or what is your criteria rather, for a strong digital offering for HSE students?
That's very interesting question. I guess that one of the, I guess that we now go very much beyond the content. As many of my colleagues say, the content is not a problem. So we need new instruments that help learning, that help students to organize themselves. We need, you mentioned assessment. And I'm very much now interested in new ways of assessment, independent assessment, adaptive assessment. Frankly speaking, we have a whole group of educational measurement, and they are not ready. They are not ready to offer convenient instruments for students to assess micro skills, if you like, to assess different techniques. We have we don't have enough simulators, different training software, not software, different training instruments. So for me, I guess that in 1 or 2 years, in all Russian universities, all courses, in terms of the content, they will be in learning management systems. And they maybe will be available for just for demonstration. So you can read, you can watch, but do we help students to learn? That's for me the main criterion for the digital offering.
Okay, great, thank you. I mean, I think it might be interesting to talk about, some of the problems that always get flagged when we talk about digital learning, which is the, how do you teach a subject that has traditionally relied very heavily on a physical space? So lab work is the main example that gets cited by a lot of people. Organic chemistry, I think, is the subject that always gets flagged as being particularly difficult to teach if you are not in a practical environment. There are, however, platforms emerging like lab exchange at Harvard, I think, and some other innovation that is arguably maybe just a little bit further behind the curve than the LMSs, which are obviously predate COVID and were around building these systems beforehand. I mean, Leah, if it's not too tricky a question, I was wondering if I could come to you just to see, like, what's Coursera's view, again, from a supplier side? How to, as everyone said, you can supply high quality courses. We have the knowledge and expertise to do that. Is the next struggle, finding a way to fold in not only assessment, but also creating a space where students can learn with subjects that at first glance look quite tricky to digitize?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, we started out following the courses of adding this new type of learning module on the platform, which I said before, we call a guided project. And what was unique about that is it allowed people to take software and use that software in a virtual environment, so that if you were learning any type of technical skill or skill that required software, you could actually practice that skill. And I would say there's now hundreds and hundreds of guided projects, thousands being created all over the world. Universities are creating them. We have our own authors. And these are really a step forward in skill mastery and demonstration, as opposed to, for a lot of these skills, the way they used to be taught is you would listen to a lecture on how to code, or you would listen to a lecture on how to build a presentation. So I think that is a step forward. We are definitely now thinking about how we can use this platform and take it a step forward to solve this deeper need, which is hands-on physical science experiments. And we don't have plans there right now, but I would say that there is, I believe in the efficiency of the supplier side in the education world and its ability to solve and attack and provide solutions to problems if there is a market. So there are tons and tons of startups now popping up in education. There is a ton of investor money going into this space. And now hopefully there are thousands of universities around the world who will be committed to looking at these projects, whether they be lab-related products, whether they be new assessment technologies, and bringing them into their ecosystem. Even if we didn't do soon, I'll go back to learn on person as well. So I think it's a really, really exciting moment where people can step back and think, like, what would I ideally have as part of my blended learning ecosystem, and engage these entrepreneurs and startups. And, for companies like Coursera, we might build some of these things, but we're also looking out into the ecosystem. If we have this platform that's serving thousands of campuses around the world, are there other smaller startups that are tackling some of these more specific problems connected to chemistry labs or physics labs? And we'll also look at bringing them into our ecosystem as well.
Okay, great, thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left before I open it up to Q&A, so I thought I'd ask you another incredibly difficult question to see if we can top that out quickly. It's about some of the questions you've had come through already are about measuring student satisfaction alongside, I think, a parallel equally important topic is making sure that staff, as we said, don't feel overburdened or like they're being asked to do too much or change too much too quickly. I was just wondering to the panel, how are you monitoring your interactions with staff and students to see how they are coping with the shift for online? Because it is quite a seismic shift in some cases.
Alistair, maybe I can have a first go at that.
Sure, please do.
If you don't mind. So we've been surveying our students quite frequently, actually, in the COVID period. It goes without saying, we are still in session at the moment. We haven't been on Northern Hemisphere summer. So our students have been engaged across 2 terms so far, and we're about to go into our 3rd term, and that will be some face-to-face element. We wanted to know very early on how our students were doing and how our platforms were performing, how our colleagues were doing. And we also wanted to make sure that our academics were surveyed enough so that we get an insight into what was going on there. What we found was that our students actually were very, very pleased with the education that they were being offered. And that's testimony to the massive efforts colleagues made to put it online. And I'm sure that's the case in every institution. But we wanted to find out what their anxieties were about. And their anxieties were about micro things, like how to transition between platforms that colleagues were using. So how do you use Blackboard Collaborate after you've been using Teams, and what on earth's a breakout room in Zoom? They were also really anxious about assessment. And I think we moved into assessments really quite soon after lockdown. And we allowed colleagues to experiment with assessing in a digital environment and almost had 100 flowers blossoming. Now, I think that was great. And there was a lot of innovation there, really exciting. But it didn't make for an even student experience. So we made sure that, we had our fingers on the student pulse there. So the whole thrust of what we've been doing on digital assessment since then has been listening to students and how they've experienced particular platforms and the transaction costs of moving between them, but also about things like online proctoring. And our students made it very clear that they would rather we didn't, as a big direction of travel, move into online proctoring. So we've really tried to listen to that and not do that in a big way, which has really encouraged us to think very authentically about how we assess in a digital space. So you mentioned program level assessment before. We're very keen on that. We're very keen on trying different platforms and on e-portfolios, which is why my comments about how you extract an artifact and move it around, which Leah answered much more eloquently, is absolutely on the money for our students. So their insights have been critical. And the data they give us, their engagement behaviors are really instructive in helping us think strategically about what we do next.
Okay. Isaac, please go ahead.
Thank you. I guess that's a very difficult question. Again, we did a study of Russian students, more than 15,000 students in March, and then in May. And one of the significant part of the study was about their satisfaction, their well-being. And unfortunately, we see, we could expect that, but we have hard data to show that anxiety, dissatisfaction are growing. Even a significant part of students noted that they like distant technologies, they like opportunity to watch the lecture again, to work independently, to plan their own time. At the same time, the overall, they were not happy. The majority of them were not happy. And many of them mentioned the importance of informal communication. So I guess that, again, we have to think how to make the experience of using digital technologies more, not just, I agree that we have to make it more engaging, but how exactly can we do some informal gathering using distant technologies? I think that yes, we have such experience. We run a couple of summer schools this year, but it's extremely difficult. We have to learn a lot. So far, I guess that question of student satisfaction and well-being will be extremely difficult, important. It will be really critical question during the next academic year, coming academic year.
It's interesting that you say the survey was conducted in March, purely because there's I think it was a YouGov survey in the UK, a slightly smaller sample, I think it was about 3,500 students, that it noted that pushback from students in March. Mm-hmm. And then the same survey was taken again a few months later, and mm-hmm. it had actually dropped. Students were more amenable to learning online. So from the beginning of lockdown to where we are now, maybe it's just conditioning or acceptance, or I don't know what, but there was definitely a shift in the study that I read in the UK that showed that initial pushback from students has actually decreased over time. The other thing that the UK student survey flagged, which I thought was interesting, was the anxieties of students were around several things, but quite often it was to do with, as you say, time with tutors to feel like they presumably have the social interaction and have the care and attention they need for their courses, and also developing the skills for independent study, which I suppose you could argue is a bit of a catch-22 at the moment, because they're having to learn independently how to study independently. But hopefully if putting the right architecture and the infrastructure around them provides a good opportunity to do that. And if they get sufficient time with the tutors while they are doing it, one would hope that they felt sufficiently supported. I mean, that was my takeaway anyway. Loretta, you're nodding. It's, if you'd like to...
Yeah, it's all very interesting. I really understand where Hsc is coming from in so many ways. When we surveyed our students, there was quite a distinctive split between the undergraduate experience and the graduate experience. And undergraduates said quite clearly that time management was their biggest challenge. And the graduates actually said that they, on the whole, they didn't mind online learning, because in our part of the world, people tend to form families quite young. So many of our masters and many of our doctoral students do have families. And so they found there was a lot more flexibility, and they could manage the other parts of their life with online learning quite well. But undergraduates definitely said time management was an issue. So knowing that, when we went into this semester, and we started 2 weeks ago, even though Kazakhstan is like Russia, and today is Day of Knowledge, so congratulations to everyone from Russia who's listening. We start our semester a little bit earlier. And so we formed, under the chairmanship of one of our wonderful deans, a fall semester task force, which split all the key challenges that we knew would be coming ahead of us, from looking at student engagement and co-curricular activities and well-being. And in our case, we're still growing, so we're always recruiting faculty. So we had, I think, about 40 new faculty coming from Australia and UK, all around the world. So how do we actually bring them on board in an online way? So it was really online onboarding and orientation for students at the undergrad, master's and doctoral level in very new ways, and onboarding of faculty. And that was quite the challenge, because our brand new HR director, who's the first person who's had that role, she's actually in Canada. So she was looking at how does she onboard our faculty. She's in Canada, we're in Kazakhstan. So she's been up at 3 a.m. a lot, working out these online orientations. So in terms of supporting new faculty, that we tried to put a lot of effort into that. And we're a little bit unique in the sense that most of our faculty are international. So we have about 550 faculty, and 85% of those are international, and they come from 59 countries. So US is the most popular, UK, Russia, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. So what we found is that many of our faculty were undergoing some quite serious challenges at home. You know, people have elderly parents, they've got sick children, so they wanted some flexibility. So in response to our wonderful colleagues in Faculty Senate, we created a change of duty station. So we now have a number of our faculty, about 100 faculty, were able to go home to Italy or Greece or UK, Australia, and they're actually working from home until at least the end of December, when at this stage we haven't made a decision about what we do next semester. But we tried to support people by offering very clear onboarding and orientation and that kind of flexibility. I know that's a little bit unique to us because of the nature of our workforce, but that seems to have been useful as an acknowledgement that under extraordinary circumstances, everyone's trying the best they can.
Well, I think it's important to flag how universities respond should be guided by, you know, their unique mix of faculty and students. It's certainly something that's come up when I've heard Leah's colleagues talk about this in the past, in terms of tracking who is well equipped for digital transformation, you know, what are the different challenges depending on your geographical location, your cohort, your workforce. These are all important factors. I'm mindful of time, but Leah, I was wondering if I could just squeeze in one question about the data and the dashboard that Coursera offers when it partners with a university? Because I was wondering, if obviously you're looking at this from a different perspective again, but are there tools that Coursera's partners use that can help them gain some insights into the patterns of learners and staff and their behaviors?
Yeah, absolutely. So when everyone was answering this question about what would ideal digital learning ecosystem or infrastructure look like, we were focusing a lot on the technology layer. And I think, if you step back from the technology and the learning experience, what an ideal system looks like, in my view, is it's one where a student can go to a university, identify what is the job role or the career path I might like to pursue in the future. In partnership with the university, they can figure out what are the skills that I might need to pursue that path, hard skills, soft skills, and then what courses and curriculum should I take, whether I want to take them all now as part of a degree program, or whether I want to take them throughout my lives. And I think that's the big leap that universities need to take, because that's not the way many of us learn today. When I send my kid to elementary school, school is basically his job. But when a college student goes to school, they're going because they're looking for a certain return on the time and money that they put in. And I think the security in which they will be able to achieve that reward at the end significantly influences the experience they'll have. So that's by way of saying, what we're working now on at Coursera is we have a big corporate business. And in that corporate business, it's very simple. We've launched academies and we work with our corporate clients and we say, what are the skills that you want your learners to learn? Here are the pathways, and we allow each of their learners to track skills acquisition along the way. And we're now, after having distributed a lot of the courses and projects to our universities, starting to engage our universities at that level. How can you actually take your curriculum and map it into a set of skills pathways that students can learn at your institution, and then give them feedback? So the back end of our platform actually shows in a very granular level, as well as showing to the learner, how do you compare in terms of your skills profile? We have something called skill sets. So how does your skill set compare to someone who wants to get a job in IT, compared to someone who wants to be a data scientist, compared to someone who wants to be a manager in a business or an entrepreneur? And so that's the conversation I'm looking forward to having with universities. Right now the conversation is very much focused on how do we complement and supplement the curriculum at a course level. I think the next set of conversations we'll have is how do we actually take a step beyond the curriculum and allow students to look at the curriculum as a set of learning pathways and skills that they might pursue. But it's going to be a big step to get there, I think.
Great, thank you. All right, well, we've had quite a lot of questions. I will try and squeeze in as many as I can. I'll try and maybe pick a couple from areas we haven't talked about quite so much. So Jackie Lab asks, is there an implicit expectation that all students have the capacity, the equipment and the know-how to engage fully in a digital learning environment? And does this risk disenfranchising specific groups? So it's a question about access, basically. Rawdon, you look like you maybe have something to say.
Yeah, no, look, absolutely. It risks disenfranchising some students. So it's really incumbent upon universities to do something about it. I think, and each university will have its own different demographic that it has to deal with, and make sure that their experiences really are genuinely even across the cohorts. But I think the responsibility there is for universities to help as well.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. In our environment, our CIO went through the whole country to find out which cities and villages did not have stable internet access. So those villages have been highlighted. Those students are eligible to apply for either a laptop or a dongle, or in extreme circumstances, they can apply to move back to campus. Everyone else is gone, but those very small number of students are allowed to return. But I completely agree with Rawdon. If we're going to consider equity as a key component of our social impact, then we have to help, and that has to be based on data.
I fully agree. We, again, in our study, we found that approximately 10% of students even don't have sufficient internet access or laptop, etc. And in fact, many Russian universities gave laptops, computers from their computer classes to students in need. But we think that there is another dimension in this inequality in access, because we have to remember that, especially for recent school leavers, their whole environment, whole campus environment, whole university environment plays very important educational role, especially for students from low-income families with insufficient cultural capital. We have to think how we are going to replace this, to cover this gap, this deficit. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in the UK, particularly with the levelling up agenda that the government's announced, where perhaps this is maybe a blind spot, but time will tell once we hear how they are going to level up the economy. I think if we can just maybe squeeze in just one more question before we wrap up. It's a question from Yap Hui Ni, who asks, how can digital transformation add diversity and dynamism to outside classroom experiences? For example, exposure to new cultures, field trips to promote informal learning. Well, clearly some of those are going to be off limits for a while, but I was wondering, do people see another opportunity here where students can get a more diverse and more international education through digital transformation?
Mm-hmm.
So Alistair, I think you raised two questions there. One is about an international experience and the other one's about benefiting from an international education. And I think definitely digital transformation can facilitate both those things. On the international experience front, I think there's a huge opportunity, but there's also a bit of a problem that needs solving. The opportunity is to really engage folks in genuine immersive experiences of other places and other cultures. But the problem that we have to crack is not to concretize those experiences so they end up just being distilled distortions of what might otherwise be different kinds of experiences. So if you're having a genuinely international experience, it needs to reflect a full cultural immersion, not something that is just a rather one-dimensional experience. And I think that's worth bearing in mind as we travel less and we look more for trying to bring different experiences into our own living rooms and through the screens that we look at all day long.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap things up there. So we don't have time for Leah to tell us how Coursera are going to deliver that, but hopefully we can. Sorry, but I'd like to say thank you to all of our panel for joining us today. I think it's been really interesting, and it's been a real pleasure to have such a diverse group of panelists from across 4 different continents. I think hopefully we've given as international a perspective on this as is possible in 60 minutes or just about. So like I say, please, if you do have any more questions, then feel free to follow up, and we will do our best to both put you in touch with the right people and share the recording. And Coursera also have a digital stand as part of the World Academic Summit. So if any delegates want to visit there, and there is space to carry on a digital conversation. If you have any more questions, people will be available to answer those. So thank you to Rawdon, to Leah, to Loretta, and to Isaac. I hope you all enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Thanks very much.